Yeah. Hello everyone. My name is Quinten, and today I'm going to be talking about the online learning of Riemannian hidden Markov models in Hadmard spaces. This is a project I worked on last summer together with Salem from earlier today, and Cyrus Mostajeran, who is also one of the chairs of this session. I'll start by talking about the model we use to describe the problem we're trying to solve. Then I'll describe the algorithm we try to fit our model, and then I'll describe the experiment we did to study our algorithm. So for our model, well, I suppose we can begin with a fairly general situation, which is that we have a sequence of states. A fairly general assumption to go with that is that they are causally related, at least probabilistically. Now, we're looking at a Markov model, which means that we assume that instead of depending on the entire past, successive states really only depend on the recent past. And furthermore, in our case, we're looking at hidden Markov models, which means that instead of being given a sequence of states, we're given a sequence of observations which are indicative of those states, but we're never certain which state we are in. So what might those observations look like? Well, this being the theme of the conference, these are values in Hadmard spaces. And we do this since, we know that these seem to be this seems to be a promising approach in several areas, amongst others, radar data processing and also electroencephalogram data, encephalogram data. And so one example that that was worked on in the past was that in is to automate the dosage of anesthesia during general anesthesia. During general anesthesia, one might assume that a patient is in one of 5 states, so either awake, drowsy, asleep, in deep sleep, or comatose. And based on these and this forms but when a patient is in this state, it's not obvious from their appearance what state they are in. So one might use electron or EEG data to try to deduce the state they are in. This forms a hidden Markov model because, well, we have these observations with this EEG data, and we have a Markov model because we're in one of 5 states. So in particular, what space will we be looking at, since it'd be difficult, well, in the computational setting to test all Hadamard spaces. We are looking at the space of symmetric positive definite matrices, which also commonly occurs covariance matrices. This corresponds, for example, also to the EEG data case. And in this case, in a hidden Markov model, that means we need a way to relate our states to our observations. And the way we do this is by assuming that for every state, the observations are distributed according to a Riemannian Gaussian distribution. To do that, we use a Riemannian metric, in our case, the Fisher-Rao metric. So the point of this project was to develop an algorithm that does this. And in particular, one of the issues you quickly run into when working on manifolds is that one uses a lot of memory. It's not entirely realistic in this scenario to be working with 1,000 by 1,000 matrices. And if one has 1,000 of those matrices, then one is already using several gigabytes of data. So in order to get around that, one approach we worked on was to store memory in a mini batch. So instead of loading all the data into memory at once, we only load in small mini batches, and we load and unload individual observations on the go as the algorithm proceeds. In practice, this means that whereas a non-online algorithm would use an amount of memory that is proportional to the input data, we use an amount of memory that's independent of the data size. From there, we use an approach based on stochastic gradient descent to every time we change our data set to improve to re-estimate our parameters. And to initialize our data, we use k-means, Riemannian k-means, since, well, Gaussian distributions resemble clusters. So using a clustering algorithm to initialize our algorithm seems to work decently. Since we're using means, we need a way to update these. And of course, we do these based on geodesics. And since we're trying to study how our performance, we compare it to another algorithm. In our case, we compare it to the expectation maximization Baum-Welch algorithm, which is non-online and also solves the hidden Markov model problem. So for our experiment, we looked at a simulated chain of 10,000 matrices. For our space, we used the Poincare disk. The Poincare disk conveniently is the submanifold of the 2x2 SPD matrices with determinant 1. And importantly, sort of geodesics restrict from one to the other. So we can use the larger space to represent the smaller space in this case. And as we use hidden Markov model with 3 states. And to assess how well things are running, we use different mini batch sizes. So for our results, we can split our results into 3 sections. First of all, we can consider the computational results, so the runtime and things like that. Second of all, we can consider the Markov model, so the transition matrix and so on. And then we can thirdly, we can consider the hidden aspect of the Markov model, so the Gaussian distributions that go with the different states. So for the first part of the results, the computational side, we did relatively well. In this case, we see that for the runtime, for a mini batch size of 200, we see that the online algorithm took around 6 seconds, whereas the expectation maximization took around 2,600 seconds. So that's around 450 times faster. In a way, more importantly, our goal, which was to reduce memory, we also achieved. So for memory usage, we see that whereas the expectation maximization loads all 10,000 matrices into memory, we only use 200. That's 50 times better. For the Markov model aspect of the results, we can, one way to quantify the error in the performance of the Markov model is to look at the transition matrices. And in our case, a simple measure would be to look at the element-wise root mean square error between the transition matrices. So here we see a slight improvement for the online algorithm, although some more work can be done. So since we're looking for the last part of the results, the hidden aspect, one thing we can look at is what I call the accuracy. So in a hidden Markov model, we start with these observations and we don't know what the states these are in. So a natural question in many cases is to identify the true state that is associated with every observation. And so this is what I call the accuracy, which is the proportion of states for which the algorithm correctly estimates the true state that we are in. Here we see that our online algorithm performs slightly better than the expectation maximization. And importantly, we also see that we do need a minimum mini batch size, because for smaller mini batch sizes, we see the accuracy quickly decreases. So finally, another aspect of the hidden parts of the Markov chain is the Gaussian distributions. The Gaussian distributions consist of 2 parts, the means and the standard deviations. For the means, we can plot these since we're on a Poincare disk. So here we plotted in black the means as computed by the expectation maximization algorithm. In red, the true means, and in blue, the means estimated as by our online algorithm. Now, for every mini batch size, we ran the algorithm 10 times or on 10 different simulated data sets, really, to compare how well it did. And in this case, we see that, well, the online algorithm seems to consistently perform better than the expectation maximization. And importantly, we also see that for mini batch size between 200 and 100, we see that it's more consistent in its estimates for a mini batch size of 200. For the standard deviations, well, these also improve for the online algorithm since, well, you need the means to estimate the standard deviations frequently, and those were better in the case of the online algorithm. So overall, what do we find? Well, we found that computationally, this algorithm, the online algorithm, seemed to perform better. And importantly, we did seem to reach our goal, which was to reduce the memory usage to one that's independent of the amount of data we receive. Finally, the transition matrix, or the Markov model part of the results, seems to be better, although some work could still be done. And for the hidden aspect of the results, we seem to overall perform better. So I think overall, we achieved our goal, which was that we improved the computational performance while maintaining the quality, if not improving them, of the quality of the results. So what might we do next? Well, there's a few things we want to do. Firstly, we want to look at a larger variety of spaces. This is a Poincaré disk, and we can look at far more spaces than that. One of the easiest ways to do that is the increasing dimension of the matrices. We initially had some challenges we faced some challenges because we wanted to increase it to higher dimensions than just 2 by 2 matrices. And part of the difficulty was with computing the normalization factor of the Gaussian distributions. But as you saw in earlier work, such as that by Simon and also some other by Santilli on the archive, it's now possible to compute these more effectively. That's quite exciting for us. And also, we'd like to increase the number of states in our Markov chain, but this runs into a few issues in that, firstly, the algorithm in some cases will double count states, which means it assigns 2 means to what is really one Gaussian cluster. And similarly, it sometimes undercounts, meaning it assigns 1 mean to what is 2 separate clusters. So those are some of these challenges we face. Well, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
So questions? I don't see questions from Zoom. Yes.
So I just have a fairly straightforward question. Can you tell us how the outcome of your algorithm depended on initialization? When you use different initializations, how did that?
I tried different initializations, such as a constant initialization or an overall, but overall, I think the k-means initialization worked extremely well, and that after that, I didn't really try many different schemes. As you can see over here, we have the k-means actually perform. The online algorithm does not perform much better than the k-means just on its own. But this is the tricky situation where if you have a hidden Markov model with Gaussian distributions, is essentially a more sophisticated clustering problem. In the sense that if the clusters are well separated, then you could in essence just cluster things, and then you have a Markov model without the hidden part, and then just analyze it as a Markov model. But if the clusters overlap a bit, it's advantageous to look at it as a hidden Markov model, because then you have also a transition matrix, and you can use the transition matrix to help deduce, to help assign points to clusters. So for example, if you're halfway between 2 clusters, then if you're halfway between clusters A and B, but you know before you were in cluster B, then in a pure clustering problem, you don't know where to assign that. But if you also have a transition matrix, if you know that cluster B is likely to return to cluster B, even though you're halfway in between, it probably corresponds to cluster B. So we see that overall, this algorithm tends to, and we have seen, I have seen cases of this, it does turn to perform better when we are when the clusters overlap a bit. That is really the use case, I suppose.
Okay, so maybe one question and a very quick answer, please. If we want, we need to have 2 minutes break before the next session.
It was about the mini-batch size.
Yeah.
Because we see some kind of saturation of the accuracy.
Yeah.
Is it related? I mean, how do you think that the size of the mini-batch is related to how difficult it is to estimate the gradient that you are? Because when you are taking a bigger mini-batch, I mean, from what I understand, it's to better do the SSD part.
Yeah.
And do you think it's related to that, or?
Yeah, I think you could say it is related to as I think that's probably a good way of describing it, because I mean every time you look at the mini batch, sort of every time it does one step of the algorithm, it compares the current results compared to the entire what it's seen in the mini batch, and if one cluster is underrepresented, then probably yeah.
Okay, I suggest that we
We'll
move
take
the
a
next
10-minute break.
10-minute break. We move the other questions offline. Thank you very much. So.
There you go. Good job.
So one thing is,
Yes.
I have to delog from the network